The Truth as I Know It About NESARA. August 20, 2020 by Anna von Reitz. My mother was a farm girl from Wisconsin and so was I, growing up. She worked with General Roy on what we called the farm union cases. We were in the midst of the agricultural revolt that occurred in the Midwest in the late 1960s to early 1970s. You may not remember the NFO, National Farmers Organization, but I do. I also remember convoys of dairy farmers driving milk trucks to Milwaukee and dumping millions of gallons of milk in the streets. Most of this misery and unrest was the result of the Agricultural Act of 1934, the little-known but heinous twin sister of the Emergency Banking Act, which among other things placed land belonging to the states of the Union under foreign control, seized custodial title to public and private land across America, and implemented the property tax system. This is when the insanity well and truly began, and the basis by which it has flourished and continued ever since. The purloined land placed under this foreign title and property tax system in 1934 was used as collateral guaranteeing the earlier bankruptcy 1906 of the Scottish interloper that did business as the United States of America, Incorporated. Our property was finally released in 1953 when the 1906 USA bankruptcy settled, but was almost immediately seized upon again by the same guilty banks, politicians and military officials who have been responsible for this pernicious continuing fraud and abuse since 1863. Under this scheme, all Americans who were not in the U.S. military or military dependents were presumed to be municipal citizens of the United States, and their lands and homes and other private property were taken into custody by the alien property custodian, an office eventually inherited by the U.S. Attorney General's office. Arbitrarily assigned land descriptions and land titles were issued and applied over our United States patents, and the title holders were presumed to be foreign residents, specifically municipal custodial trusts, the now familiar STRAWMEN, entities that were also presumed to owe property taxes to pay for their custodial services to the municipal government. Read that, the U.S. military used us, our land, our homes, our businesses, as collateral to borrow against, and the Federal Civil Service charged us fees for services in the form of property taxes for services none of us ever agreed to receive or pay for, and which mostly served their ends and profit motives, not ours. Remember that Lincoln made the Union Army responsible for the settlement of the Civil War and the protection of our money and property via the Lieber Code in 1863, which has since morphed into the Hague Conventions. The Union Army has continued to run the show behind the scenes ever since, and so most of this criminality has had its seedbed with the U.S. Army, which was later joined in its nefarious endeavors by the U.S. Navy. Both of these organizations formed municipal corporations and began operations as the U.S. Army and U.S. Navy in the 1880s, playing both ends against the middle. As presumed municipal citizens of the United States, we were saddled with the debts owed by the territorial United States and their federated state-of-state franchises. In this way, average Americans were fraudulently entrapped into paying mortgages owed by, for example, the territorial state of Florida, and state of Texas, and state of Michigan, etc., plus property taxes they never owed on their own land. We were basically attacked under false pretenses by both foreign federal subcontractors, deliberately misidentified as federal citizens, and our treasonous employees continued to collude against us for decades. The military is just as guilty as the Federal Civil Service, merely less informed about the actual history and criminal collusion that has brought us to this juncture, so that we continue to have a few decent officers like General Roy who are loyal to the American cause, the constitutions, and the states and people of this country. The massive fraud and criminality uncovered by the farm union cases and which gave rise to the original NESARA proposal, by one lone congressman who was laughed at for his efforts, was buried by the system and has continued to be buried and hush-hushed by the system ever since. It isn't that the higher-ups of the Army and the Navy don't know about the crime, they are part of it. They and their highly profitable municipal corporations doing business as the U.S. Army and U.S. Navy have been the backbones and enforcers of the Great Fraud since 1863. If the Union Army had been loyal, none of this would be happening now. They would have been honest about the situation with the American people, and our actual state governments would have made short work of the Reconstruction. Instead, the rats sold out to the British Crown, and the Brits snuck into town and replaced our states of states with their own territorial states of states. The Scottish interloper was not acting by itself in a vacuum. The fraud and deceit pulled on the American states and people was accomplished by members of Congress and the U.S. military, both, colluding to sell us out to the British Crown. The proof of this has recently been confirmed by no less than two attempts to pull the same stunt and substitute a second Scottish interloper for our Federation of States. Members of the U.S. Navy chartered another Scottish corporation doing business as the United States of America, Incorporated, just recently, and the Reign of Heavens organization attempted a similar end run, attempting to infringe upon our good name and trademarks and pass their look-alike, sound-alike commercial corporation off as our Federation of States. The whole circumstance, front to back, is outrageous and shameful. Like everything else, we have two sets of military, too. We have the territorial United States Navy and the municipal U.S. Navy and U.S. Army. We've been suckered and coerced into supporting all these foreign corporations and milked like cows, deceived and entrapped, and grossly abused by our own employees who have deliberately evaded their obligations under the constitutions by pretending that we are foreigners in our own country. So you want to know about NESARA? It was originally titled, National Economic Security and Restoration Act, but as you noted, two look-alike, sound-alike versions have since been substituted for the original. They are National Economic Security and Recovery Act, and National Economic Security and Reformation Act. My opinion: nothing is going to get better and nothing is going to fundamentally change until the leadership of the United States Armed Forces and the bankers of the U.S. Army and U.S. Navy are fully convinced that 1. The people of this country are onto their scams and fed up. 2. The people of the whole world are onto their scams and fed up. 3. Their lies and excuses and false flags won't work anymore. 4. Their patsy politicians will be thrown out on their rumps and not able to protect them anymore. 5. Their own necks are in the noose if things don't change, radically, for the better. When the people of this country really wake up and turn a baleful eye on their beloved military establishment, when they fully grok the fact that the military has been in charge of this madhouse since 1863 and that the military has been far, far less than honest, helpful, loyal or protective of its actual employers, things will change. Just think about it, and let it really sink in. Our military has been in charge and responsible for all this crap since 1863. As for the recitation of the history of the farm union cases, so far as it goes, is pretty much correct. The good guys got sidelined and whacked. The Supreme Court dug into it all right, to better cover it up, then took a powder, and said, basically, well, you're right, but the entity you are suing is bankrupt, so you can't get blood out of a turnip. And that's where it all ended. So far as I know, despite a lot of urban myth, that was the final straw and there hasn't been any movement on NESARA ever since. The answer of course is to sue the principals in the court of public opinion worldwide, and to sue the World Bank, IBRD, and Federal Reserve for their parts in all of this. The banking history presented in your recount of NESARA is largely incorrect. The Federal Reserve actually started as a revenue agency for the Union, right along with the Internal Revenue Service, which was employed to capture and disrupt Confederate shipping. The Federal Reserve sold bonds through the United States Bureau of the Treasury in the 1860s, known 1040ths bonds. They were called 1040 bonds because they could be redeemed in 10 or 40 years, respectively. Lincoln used them to back his greenbacks. Later, they morphed into the 1040 form, which the sister agency, the Internal Revenue Service, collected as the federal income tax, and reinvested in U.S. Treasury bonds. In addition to the fiat script they collected from you every year as gift and estate taxes owed by your straw man, they also accessed the strawman Sestuikevi trust funds of all the missing and presumed lost at sea Americans based on your unprotected signature on the 1040 form. This allowed them to double dip and pay both the territorial and municipal government bar tabs. The result was the cancerous growth of government and public employee unions, wasteful duplication of services, slush funds of mammoth proportions, and growing contempt for all of us. The Beltway cocktail parties started to exude this contempt for we, the people, during the Johnson administration, because we went along like cattle, oblivious of how we were being defrauded and abused by our own employees. It became commonplace to refer to us as sheep, and cattle, and marks. Mafiosi and Hollywood whores joined in the contempt of all those useless farmers, who ironically fed and enriched all these despicable characters. The same criminal scum, John McCain, Bill Gates, and Hillary Clinton, contorted this same phrase, useless farmers, into useless eaters, when in fact, it was they who were lapping up all the cream in sight, and unjustly enriching themselves at the expense of those same farmers, who were still loyally feeding them. There hasn't been an actual United States Treasury since 1924, so any such thing, taking over the Federal Reserve, is a misstatement at best. Instead, the International Monetary Fund, backed by the U.S. Army and U.S. Navy and U.S. Air Force and Standard Oil and so on, has functioned as the U.S. Treasury, so what has really happened is that the Federal Reserve is being gobbled up by the IMF and rolled up like a carnival show. This is long after the Federal Reserve successfully bankrupted its trademark, Federal Reserve System, in 2009, pocketed the profit, and left the U.S. taxpayers with a bill and trillions of fiat U.S. dollars, floating around with no backing but the hot air of Congress, which is never in short supply. That wasn't enough debt heaped on our weary heads, so the Brits ordered Obama to expedite the counterfeiting of the U.S. dollar. He claimed that he was only following orders when he shipped the engraving plates and presses from the U.S. Mint and all the supplies necessary for the Chinese to print as many U.S. dollars as they wished and distribute them like sugar candy in large sacks, pallets and boatloads as payola to colluding governments. Strangely enough, I believe him. That particular order had to come from higher up. Anyway, the entire history of this is all lies and crimes and fraud and bunco, and if the military is actually making any correction now, read the fine print and look up the legal meaning of every single word. If you enjoy having Anna's latest articles made into videos, please consider making a purchase from Ed's website sacredintuitiveelements.com. Thank you.